Donald Trump says he would consider withholding aid from Jordan and Egypt if they don't take in refugees from Gaza. Trump has put forward a plan for the US to take over the territory. In an interview on Fox News, Trump said Palestinians would not have the right to return to Gaza and would get much better housing instead in neighbouring countries. The plan has drawn outrage from Palestinians.
Internally displaced Palestinians in Gaza on their way to the Strip's north, making their way home while a shaky ceasefire is still in place, as hundreds of Gazans crossed an area recently occupied by the Israeli military. U.S. President Donald Trump doubled down on his plans for the territory, saying the U.S. plans to own Gaza and declaring it a real estate development for the future, a plan that would exclude Gazans who call it home.
The Palestinians have the right to return?
No big money spent. No, they wouldn't, because they're going to have much better housing, much better. In other words, I'm talking about building a permanent place for them, because if they have to return now, it'll be years before you could ever. It's not habitable. It will be years before it could happen.
For many in Gaza already grappling with dire humanitarian conditions, the prospect of being forced to leave and prevented from returning is a painful reminder of past exile. While Palestinian refugees' right to return is recognized under international law, Israel has been blocking it for decades, resulting in generations of Palestinians born in exile since 1948. Trump's proposal is a new challenge to this right, this time specifically for Gazans who are speaking out to reject forced displacement.
We are rooted in this homeland and have been for thousands of years, and Trump decides to expel us from it? This is our homeland, and we will never leave. Where should we go? Our only other homeland lies inside Israel.
We'd rather die than immigrate. We endured throughout the war in death, hunger, and bombing, and fled while the bombing was above us. And migrate? There's no way for immigration now. Critics fear this policy could further entrench deep divides that have long fueled the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Hamas, classified as a terror organization by the US, EU, and Germany, has already issued a stark response.
As for the projects of the West, America, and Trump, they are doomed. They will fall. We will bring them down as we brought down the projects before them.
There are fears Trump's Gaza plan could put the second stage of ceasefire talks at risk, at a time when the initial deal is already in peril. Hamas has accused Israel of violating the ceasefire and says it will stop releasing Israeli hostages, ushering a new era of instability after 3 weeks of relative calm in Gaza.
I'm joined now by Michael Lynk, former UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territory, joining us from Ontario, Canada. Welcome to you, Michael. Trump is threatening to withhold aid to Jordan and Egypt if they refuse to take Palestinian refugees. Could Trump get what he wants by pulling this lever, do you think?
Highly doubtful. Look, in a very unstable region, this bipartisan American agreement that's been around since the 1980s and the 1990s to provide significant amounts of American military and economic aid to both Jordan and Egypt has provided a certain amount of stability to two Arab countries, probably the two most important Arab countries for Israel and its security. I can't imagine him wanting to withdraw that aid in response to this. First of all, I think it would cause a great deal of unrest in the Arab streets if the leaders of both either Egypt or Jordan acceded to that. But you also have the United Arab States, the Arab League, and many of the countries in the Arab Gulf fiercely opposed to this. Look, what Trump doesn't have, but what the region does have, is a long historical memory that includes the Palestinian expulsion from what became Israel in 1948, 750,000 Palestinian refugees, and another 300,000 refugees from the 1967 war. the whole Arab world knows that those million Palestinians were never allowed to return. And obviously, that's what Trump is promising now. The ability to fulfill the right to return is central to Palestinian and to Arab identity in the region.
Michael, now the world has calculated that this is really what Donald Trump plans to do. How do you calculate? How realistic is it that this could actually happen?
Well, because of the strong Arab opposition, and I must say the statements made by a number of countries around the world, I suspect this is something he's going to back down from. There was no planning put into this. I'm sure there are probably fierce debates going on within the Trump White House as to whether or not to pursue this. There was no planning done by the State Department, no planning done by the Secretary of Defense with respect to this. It's an idea that's 10 feet above the ground and doesn't have any realism attached to it. What I fear is this: is that Trump may let the idea die, as it probably will, and it obviously should. What I fear is that he's going to give as a consolation prize to Israel, A, the ability to resume the war, and B, he's likely to give a green light to the Israeli governing coalition to vastly increase both settlements and settlers on the West Bank as a prelude to Israel being able to formally annex the West Bank. That's what I see happening over the course of the next 3 to 9 months.
Michael, as we leave you, just briefly, do you have much hope the ceasefire deal will last past Saturday?
I suspect it could last beyond Saturday, but I'd be very surprised if we ever reach the second stage of this, let alone the long-term stage for the rehabilitation of Gaza. I think it's doomed, at least in the medium run and certainly in the long run.
Michael Lynk, former UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territory from Ontario, Canada. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
We're joined now by Fawaz Gerges, who's a professor of Middle Eastern politics and international relations at the London School of Economics. He joins us now from Amman in Jordan. Great to have you back on the programme again. I'd like to start, if I may, with the news that the fragile ceasefire in Gaza is starting to crumble. Hamas, of course, announcing that it will postpone the release of the next set of Israeli hostages. Can I ask you, do you think President Trump carries any responsibility for this development?
Well, thank you very much. I'm in London, not in Amman, by the way, which is, I wish I could be in Amman. It's a sunnier climate.
Thank you for clarifying that.
The ceasefire is very fragile. And President Trump's statements complicate an already complicated situation. In fact, many of us had hoped that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visit to Washington will focus on the ceasefire, that President Trump will impress on his Israeli counterpart the need to turn a temporary ceasefire into a permanent ceasefire. Instead of focusing on the ceasefire, consolidating the ceasefire, President Trump changed the script and talked about taking over Gaza and owning Gaza and displacing more than 2 million Palestinians from Gaza. In fact, Israeli Prime Minister just said today in the parliament, he said he could not believe his ears. And neither the ceasefire in Gaza nor the ceasefire on the West Bank was on the agenda of President Trump. So it's no wonder why the ceasefire now really is fragile. I would not be surprised if we see that hostilities in the next few days and next few weeks resuming in Gaza.
Trump has been doubling down on these plans of his to take over Gaza, despite the condemnation that we're hearing. He seems very determined. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, it's really beyond any kind of comprehensible, rational strategy. He digs in. He not only doubles down, he digs in. Now he made it very clear he wants to own Gaza. And the Palestinians would have no right to return to their homes. In fact, the UN top investigator on human rights called Donald Trump's statement an international crime because the forcible displacement of unoccupied people, according to the UN top investigator on human rights, amount to ethnic cleansing. So both in terms of legally and morally, what the president has been doing is undermining the rules-based international society and the rules that America set up after the end of World War II. Politically, President Trump's statements basically threaten regional stability, and in particular the security of America's allies, the Egyptian regime and the Jordanian regimes. It also undermines American credibility and trust in American leadership, both among America's allies and America's enemies as well. So it's a lose-lose idea, yet he keeps digging in and doubling down on the idea.
You mentioned Egypt and Jordan. They've been firm in saying that they will not accept the resettlement of citizens from Gaza. Trump's response to that was, I say they will. How much pressure do you think Jordan and Egypt are now under, given that they, of course, get a lot of military aid from Washington?
Absolutely. I mean, I think President Trump thinks that he owns Egypt, he owns Jordan, because he provides about $1.4 billion annual military aid, economic aid to Jordan, and $1.1 billion to Egypt. But I think President Trump undermines the opposition by Egypt and Jordan. This is not a political question for Egypt and Jordan. For Jordan, it's an existential threat. For Egypt, it could be a trigger for instability in Egypt itself. So even if President Trump decides to basically freeze the aid to Jordan and Egypt, neither Egypt nor Jordan will accept the displacement of the Palestinians from Gaza. This really would mean, and that's what I'm talking about, it's a harmful idea to regional stability, in fact, to America's allies. Yet President Trump does not really understand the difference between a real estate deal and a homeland and a nation, and what the Israel-Palestine conflict means for the imagination of the Palestinians and the Arab world as a whole.
Fawaz Gerges from the London School of Economics. Really appreciate your time and your analysis. Thanks for being on the programme for us.
Thanks.